The envelope was not electronic. It was real. Thick, cream-colored paper, unmarked, with the name Nadia Wojtek written in dark ink. The concierge of her building handed it to her in the morning as she was going out with a bag of trash. In an old sweater, with her hair in a ponytail, without her glasses. She always took them off when going outside and then regretted it because she couldn't see anything beyond 2 meters. She took the envelope, looked at it, said, "Thank you," and was about to drop it in the mailbox along with the flyers, but something stopped her. The paper was too nice. The handwriting too confident. She returned home and opened it. Inside was a single sheet. The same cream paper, the same dark ink. Nadia, 3 years is a long time to be silent, especially when the debt is unpaid. I invite you to dinner at Palais Hansen-Kempinski on Friday at 8 in the evening. If you come, tell the doorman you are a guest of Al-Qasim. If you don't come, I will understand, although I will be waiting. F. Nadia sat on a stool at her small kitchen table and reread the letter. Once, twice, 3 times. 3 years. 3 years ago, at a reception at the Vienna State Opera, she gave her gloves to a stranger. White evening gloves, rented for the occasion. She handed them over because she saw that in just 5 minutes, his awkwardly wine-stained shirt would be caught in the frame of the paparazzi gathered at the entrance, and tomorrow it would be on the front pages. She didn't know who he was. She only knew that the stain needed to be covered, and her gloves were the only thing that fit the size. He took them, looked at her, wanted to say something, but she was already being led away by the event organizer. She needed to translate the speech of the Austrian Minister of Culture for the Arab guests. Then everything blurred together. The reception ended, and she took the tram home. She thought about the gloves. They were expensive to rent, and there was no point in returning them now. And he disappeared. Just vanished from that night, like all strangers do from other people's celebrations. And now, a letter. 3 years later. F. Nadia stared at that letter for a long time. Then she set down her coffee and went to put on her glasses, because it was harder to think without them. Good day, dear viewers. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching us from today. Subscribe to the channel and give us a like. It's very important to us. Vienna in November is a special city. Not the touristy one with Christmas markets and mulled wine, that comes later in December, but the November one. Dark, damp, with the smell of chestnuts from the roasting stalls at the metro entrance, with the gray light above the dome of Karlskirche, with early twilight at 4 in the afternoon. In November, Vienna remembers that it was the capital of an empire that no longer exists, and it approaches this with that special aristocratic humility that only very old things possess. Nadia Wojtek loved Vienna precisely in November. She was 31, short, with chestnut hair just below her shoulders and gray eyes that seemed slightly out of focus without glasses, as if they were looking a bit past reality. With glasses, everything fell back into place, and her gaze became sharp, attentive, slightly ironic. Her hands were small, with long fingers, the hands of someone accustomed to holding a pencil or pen rather than a mouse. She worked as a proofreader and literary editor at a small Viennese publishing house, Schreiber & Kalt, which specialized in translated literature, predominantly from Eastern Europe and the Middle East. The work was calm, quiet, and well paid by the standards of the humanities. Nadia read texts in German, Polish, and English, corrected grammar, worked on style, and sometimes translated small pieces herself, 3 times a month, she worked as a translator at cultural events, conferences, diplomatic receptions, vernissages. She was fluent in German, Polish, English, French, and, to the complete surprise of everyone who found out, Arabic, which she had learned entirely on her own over 5 years, because the publishing house increasingly worked with Arab authors, and there was a catastrophic shortage of good translators. Arabic was difficult for her, but completely captivating. It started prosaically. The publishing house took on the translation of a novel by a Syrian author. The translator fell ill, and the chief editor, Gunther, looked panicked at the deadline. Nadia cautiously said, "I can try. I know a little Arabic." A little at that moment meant she had been studying on her own for about a year, using books and audio lessons, without any serious intention. She took the novel, worked for 3 months. It was agonizing. A dictionary on the table, grammar on her phone, a stack of books on Arabic literature. She rewrote one sentence 20 times, because in Arabic, one word can carry so many shades of meaning that the German version always seemed simplified to her. The translation turned out well. Gunther read it, paused, and said, "Nadia, you didn't say you could do this." "I didn't know myself," she replied. Since then, Arabic became a part of her work and her life. She continued to learn, courses, then a private tutor, a native speaker from Lebanon who came to her once a week and talked with her for 3 hours straight on various topics. "A teacher isn't needed when you know the words," he said. "You need one when you want to understand how this language thinks." It was an accurate observation. Arabic thought differently. There was a lot of space between words, a lot of implied meaning, a lot of context that could be read without words. Nadia called it a language that trusts the listener. It didn't explain everything. It left room for understanding. Perhaps that's why she was touched that evening at the December reception at the opera. A man who took her glove silently, because no explanations were needed. She hadn't thought of it that way then. But now, looking back, it seemed something there aligned. Arabic was difficult for her and completely captivating. She still didn't know what exactly happened that year when she started learning. One day she just opened a textbook and couldn't close it. Because it was a language that went from right to left and thought differently than European languages were used to thinking. She lived alone in a small apartment on Naschmarkt, in a late 19th century building with high ceilings, narrow windows, and creaky wooden floors. The apartment was small, but furnished like the homes of people for whom books are more important than sofas. Shelves from floor to ceiling in 2 rooms, a small table by the window with a desk lamp, 1 large armchair, 1 small sofa. The kitchen was tiny, but had a good coffee machine. She didn't have a cat. There was a red geranium on the windowsill that had survived 3 moves and 3 winters with her, which Nadia watered carefully, like the only living thing in the apartment that needed care. Her past was made up of 2 halves that never quite aligned. Her father, Krzysztof Wojtek, was from Krakow, a quiet, somewhat absent-minded historian who moved to Vienna at the age of 32 on a contract with the university and stayed forever because he met Karin. Karin Müller, Nadia's mother, was from Vienna, from a pharmacist family, practical, precise, with that special Viennese common sense that never calls something beautiful just for the sake of it. It first checks. They were a strange couple. He was dreamy and absent-minded, while she was concrete and precise. But it was this mismatch that held their marriage together. Each complemented the other with what they themselves lacked. Nadia grew up between them, absorbing a bit from both. Her father's love for what lies beyond words, and her mother's precision in the words themselves. She spent her childhood in 2 languages and 2 cities. Winters in Vienna, summers in Krakow with her paternal grandparents. In Krakow, they spoke Polish, ate bigos and cabbage pastries, and Grandpa Tadeusz told her the history of the city as if he were part of it, from medieval kings to the student uprisings of the 80s. In Vienna, they spoke German, ate schnitzel and Viennese rolls, and Grandma Helga took her to the Kunsthistorisches Museum on Sundays, explaining each painting with a seriousness that little Nadia initially didn't understand, but later came to love. As a result, she grew up as a person who had 2 homes, and not a single real one. Not in a bad sense. She never felt lost. Just everywhere she was a bit of a guest. Everywhere she was a bit of her own. She enrolled at the university in Vienna, the Department of German Studies and Translation. The choice was logical. Words, languages, texts. All of this had been her passion since childhood. University came easily, not because she was a brilliant student in terms of academic ambition, but because what was taught aligned with what she already knew. It was there that she had her only serious romance, Jakub, a law student, a Pole from Warsaw. They met at a student party, where both felt equally uncomfortable, and found each other in a corner, discussing a book they were both reading. A year and a half, almost good. Then came a gradual drifting apart, which neither of them addressed directly, until one evening Nadia said, "Jakub, I feel like we've been living next to each other for a while now, rather than together. Is that honest?" He paused and said, "Honest." They broke up without a scandal, without resentment. They simply understood that the time had come. After that, several years of a steady, solitary, sufficient life. Publishing, translations, opera in the evenings, books at night. She didn't feel sad about it. She just lived. Arabic emerged during this period as an all-consuming hobby that became work. Her past was like this: a Polish father, an Austrian mother, childhood between Krakow and Vienna, university in Vienna, German studies and translation, her first job at a small translation bureau, then Schreiber and Kalt. In terms of significant personal life events, there was one long and quietly unhappy romance in university, after which she avoided serious relationships for several years. Not because she was broken or afraid. She simply realized she could live alone, and there was nothing wrong with that. She read, translated, went to the opera. Standing tickets, Stehpate, could be bought for €3 an hour before the start. Occasionally had dinner with her friend Beata from Krakow, who had moved to Vienna 3 years ago and worked in a restaurant. Life was steady, calm, sufficient. Until a letter arrived. That evening 3 years ago was in December. The State Opera was hosting a charity reception to launch a new program supporting young musicians from the Middle East. Nadia was working as a translator. Invited through a cultural events agency, her task was to provide oral translation for the Arab delegates during conversations with Austrian officials. The event was formal. Tuxedos, evening gowns, champagne in tall glasses, a light buzz of multilingual conversations. Nadia always felt a bit like she was behind glass in such situations. She was there as a tool, useful and unnoticed, and that suited her just fine. She knew how to become transparent. Around 10 in the evening, when the main part of the program had ended and the cocktail hour began, she stood at a tall table in the corner of the hall, quietly sipping water. Champagne while working was a no-go. It dulled the senses. And observing the room. That was when she noticed him. A tall man in a tuxedo, dark, with a neat beard, over 40, stood slightly apart from the main group of guests, talking to someone from the Austrian delegation. The conversation was in English. Nadia couldn't hear the words, but she could tell from his posture. The man was reserved, polite, clearly accustomed to such events. And then, a waiter with a tray, a quick movement, the slippery glass of wine. Red wine spilled across the white shirt. The waiter blushed and apologized. The man froze, looked at his shirt, looked at the waiter. "It's not your fault," was written in his gaze. Looked at the group of photographers who were just moving toward them to capture candid shots with the guests. Nadia understood what was about to happen. The photographers would see, click, and tomorrow it would be in the social column. High-ranking guest in an embarrassing situation. She didn't have time to think. She simply walked over to him, took off her glove, the right one, white, long, silk, rented, and silently placed it on his hand, nodding toward his shirt. He understood instantly. He took the glove, covered the stain. The photographers passed by, clicked something else, and left. The man turned to her, looked, wanted to say something. "No need," Nadia said quietly in German. "It's nothing." And she was already being called. The event organizer tugged at her elbow. "Mr. Mir wants to say a few words to the Arab guests. We need a translation." She walked away without looking back. Then the tram home, late. Her legs ached. There was no one to return the glove to. She had paid for the rental herself. Did she think about him? Maybe for a second. She was curious about who he was. After that, she didn't think. Now, here was the letter. F. Nadia drank her coffee, adjusted her glasses, looked out the window where Vienna was gray and November-like. Then she opened her laptop and typed in the search. Al-Qasim Faris, Qatar. For Reed Al-Qasim's page in the business magazine, Arabian Business came up first. The photo. The same man. It became clear why the photographers had caused concern. Chairman, Al-Qasim Technology and Infrastructure, Forbes Middle East Top 50 Businessmen. Philanthropist, former advisor to... Nadia finished reading, closed the laptop, stared at the geranium for a long time. Then she opened the laptop again and started looking for what to wear on Friday. Palais Hansen Kempinski, one of the most beautiful hotels in Vienna, located in a 19th-century building on Schottengasse. Nadia had been there once for a conference. Inside there were high ceilings, marble, warm light. Not the kind of place you go to in an H&M sweater. She found a dark blue dress in her closet, bought 3 years ago specifically for such events. Strict, with long sleeves, well tailored. She took it out, tried it on, hung it in a prominent place, thought about it. Then she wrote to her friend Beata. Looks like I'm going to dinner with a billionaire. Beata replied within 30 seconds, "Explain immediately." Beata reacted predictably. They met that same evening at a small Polish cafe in Naschmarkt, where they served bigos and real Polish bread, and Nadia placed the letter on the table. Beata read, reread, then looked up. F. Who is that? Farid Al-Qasim. Beata took out her phone, typed in the search. She read silently for about 30 seconds. Nadia? She said cautiously. This is a very wealthy man. I know. Forbes Middle East. I know. And he wrote you a handwritten letter, cream-colored paper. I will be waiting because of the glove? Because of the glove. Beata looked at her. Are you going? I already found something to wear. Beata leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. Nadia Wojtek, you've been going to the opera for 3 years for standing tickets at €3. And now you're getting handwritten letters from Qatar? Life is unpredictable, Nadia said calmly, and picked up her coffee mug. She didn't tell Beata that she had been thinking about that letter for several days. Not about who Al-Qasim was, and not about the cream-colored paper, but about that night 3 years ago, about the moment when she took off the glove, quickly, without hesitation, and handed it to him, and left. She always did that, saw something and reacted, without having time to think. Grandpa Tadeusz used to tell her, Nadia, you think afterward, like historians. They only understand what was important after it has already passed. She was offended at the time, but later realized he was right. But that time she didn't think afterward. She just put it away somewhere and forgot. Because what was there to think about? A stranger? A stranger's evening? But he hadn't forgotten. On Friday at 7:45, Nadia stood at the entrance of the Palais Hansen-Kempinski and breathed slowly. She wore a blue dress, shoes with a small heel, her hair up, glasses. Without them, she wouldn't have seen the sign 3 meters away. She told the doorman Al-Qasim's name. The doorman nodded with that professional tact that people have when they know this guest is important. They led her to a small private room, not to the main restaurant, but to a room with one table, candles, flowers, and there, he. Farid Al-Qasim was standing by the window when she entered. He turned. A pause. 3 years is both a long time and a short time at once. Nadia had only seen him for a few seconds that December evening, but for some reason, his face remained, not as a memory, but as some preserved detail. Nadia Wojtek, he said in German without a questioning tone, as a statement. Farid Al-Qasim, she replied in the same way. He smiled, softly, without showiness. You came. You wrote beautifully, she said. It was hard not to come. They sat down. The waiter brought the menu. Nadia chose quickly and without theatrics. Pumpkin cream soup, veal, water. Farid, the same. Water. Where is the glove? She asked. He paused for a second, then laughed, quietly, surprised, like someone who was asked exactly what they didn't expect. It's at my home, in Doha, on the shelf. That's unusual, Nadia said. It's a reminder, he said simply. That there are people who do the right thing, not because they have to, but simply because it's the right thing to do. Nadia looked at him, a serious gaze, nothing superfluous. "Why 3 years?" she asked. "I was looking for you earlier," he said, "after that reception, through an agency. They said that translators are confidential information. Then I had a tough year. Family, business, several crises in a row. Then a friend finally found your information through the publishing house. I wrote. Here we are." "You searched for 3 years because of the glove?" "Not because of the glove," he said. "Because of the gesture." There was a difference. Nadia didn't respond. She picked up her glass of water, thought. "Well," she finally said, "and what now?" "Now? Dinner," he said. "Just dinner. I wanted to get to know you. For real. Not through a glove in the dark of the hall." She nodded. It made sense. They talked for a long time, an hour, then an hour and a half. First about Vienna. He had been here several times, loved the city, didn't understand why the Viennese were so proud of their melancholy. Then about languages. She told him about Arabic. He was genuinely surprised, not out of politeness. "You taught yourself?" "Without courses?" Then about publishing, about translation in general. He told her about himself, briefly, without listing achievements. From Doha, Construction Technologies, a fund supporting technical education in Arab countries. Then, when the conversation naturally turned personal, he shared more. He grew up in Doha, in a family that built, literally, grandfather, father, uncles. All were somehow connected to the construction industry in Qatar, which had experienced an incredible boom since the 70s. Farid understood from childhood this was his world. He loved to look at buildings not from the outside, but from the inside, how they were structured, what held them up, why some stood for 100 years while others crumbled in 20. He studied in London, Imperial College, engineering technology, then a master's in infrastructure project management. London was a good time. He got to know it slowly, through neighborhoods, through libraries, through conversations with people from all walks of life. That's where he met Haya. Haya al-Tamimi was also from Qatar, also an engineer, also studying in London. They met at a student conference on sustainable architecture and started talking about a building by architect Zaha Hadid. She thought it was too theatrical, while he believed that theatricality was justified if it served a structural purpose. They debated for an hour and a half, and then went for coffee together. Haya was extraordinary. Not in terms of beauty or charm, though she had both, but in the way she thought. She saw connections that others overlooked, between the strength of materials and the beauty of form, between engineering calculations and the human experience of space. She wanted to build bridges, real, functional ones, and at the same time, beautiful. "A bridge should be beautiful," she said, "because people cross it every day and deserve beauty that doesn't cost extra, if you think correctly." They got married 2 years after their first meeting. They returned to Doha. Both were working, he at the family company. She had secured several government contracts for small infrastructure projects. They weren't in a hurry to have children. "Let's figure out the bridges first," she joked. The accident happened on an ordinary Tuesday. She was driving to a site in the suburbs of Doha. Another car crossed into oncoming traffic. Haya died on the spot. She was 34. Farid couldn't work for 4 months. He simply couldn't. He walked around the apartment they had shared, unable to comprehend how time continued when hers had ended. Then, gradually, work returned. Not as joy, but as a tool to avoid breaking down. He worked 16 hours a day and didn't feel tired, because fatigue is a living sensation, and he still felt somewhat lifeless. The foundation emerged 2 years later. He thought of her, of what she wanted to build, what she wanted to do, of her phrase about bridges and beauty. He thought, she could have built hundreds of bridges if she had stayed. But the other engineers, those who hadn't graduated yet, who lived in Yemen or Sudan and couldn't afford university, they can. Let them build. Let there be more who build as she would have. The Al-Qasim Foundation for Technical Education started with 5 scholarships. Now, over 300 a year in 6 countries. A widower. His wife Haya died 7 years ago in a car accident. They had no children. After her death, he worked like people do who don't know what else to do with themselves at 4 in the morning. Nadia listened. Not with pity, but with attention. That was the difference she could feel. Pity brings a person down. Attention accepts. "What changed afterward?" she asked. "When exactly?" "After the loss, when it got a little easier." He thought. 2 years later, the foundation was established, he said. I started investing in engineering schools, where there were none, in Yemen, in Sudan, in small towns in Jordan. Haya was an engineer. She wanted to build bridges, not in a metaphorical sense, real ones made of metal and concrete. I thought, let others build. I'll give them the tools. Nadia was silent. That sounds like a cliché, he added, as if catching his own word. Building in her honor. No, Nadia said. That doesn't sound like a cliché. A cliché is when people talk but don't do. You are doing. He looked at her, with the same expression he had 3 years ago at the reception, when he watched her leave, not having had the chance to say anything. As dinner was coming to an end, Farid said, Nadia, I want to ask directly, may I? Yes. Would you agree to meet again? Not for business, just to talk, to walk around Vienna. I'll be here for another week. Nadia paused. You live in Doha, she said. I live in Vienna. I know. It's complicated logistics. I know that too. And you're asking anyway? I am, he said. Nadia looked at him, serious, without playfulness, without calculation. A man who found her 3 years ago because of one silent gesture, and wrote, I will wait, in a handwritten letter. All right, she said. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Maria Theresienplatz. I'll show you Vienna the way it's not shown to tourists. He smiled. That evening she walked home along the Ringstrasse, on foot, slowly under the streetlights. Vienna was vast and quiet around her. The dome of the Kunsthistorisches Museum glowed to her right. From somewhere came the sound. A violin. A street musician somewhere near the Berg Theater. Nadia thought about the gesture she made 3 years ago without thinking in a few seconds, because there was no other way. It turned out to be stuck in someone like a splinter. Not out of gratitude, for something else. Out of surprise. Out of the fact that some people simply do the right things without expecting a response, and that matters to someone. She reached home, went inside. Geraniums on the windowsill. Bookshelves. Silence. Nadia poured herself some tea, opened the same laptop, and pulled up the business magazine with his page, not to read it again, but just to look at the photograph. In that photo, he was serious, formal, in a suit. At dinner, he was different, quieter, slower, with pauses in the conversation that weren't awkward. She closed the laptop and picked up a book, but she couldn't read for long. The next day at 3 o'clock, they met at Maria Theresienplatz, the square between two museums, where there is a monument to the Empress and where families with children and dogs stroll on weekends. Nadia arrived in her usual coat with a small backpack. Farid was in a nice cashmere coat without any unnecessary details. He was looking at the square when she approached and managed to turn around before she called out to him. Good reflexes. "Where shall we start?" he asked. "With the non-touristy stuff," she said, "with what is always nearby and always unnoticed." She led him through Burgring toward Volksgarten, a small park by the Parliament, which in November was almost empty, with bare trees and the smell of wet leaves. Then into the Café Central on Herrengasse, which all tourists know, but few know that it was at this corner table that Trotsky liked to sit during his exile in Vienna, until history called him back to Russia. Nadia told the story, not like a guide with a memorized text, but as a person who has her own connections between things in her mind. There are a lot of people in Vienna who have spent some time in exile or uncertainty, she said over coffee. Freud worked here until he had to flee. Stefan Zweig wrote as long as he could. There was something about this place, a city where you can think, but also a city from which you had to leave sooner or later. "And you?" Farid asked. "Do you feel at home here?" "Halfway," Nadia said. "Vienna is my mother's half. Krakow is my father's. I live in both and in neither at the same time." "I understand," he said. "I feel similarly. Doha is home. But after university in London, after many years of traveling, I feel a bit at home everywhere and nowhere completely." "Is it lonely?" Nadia asked directly. "It was," he said. "Now it's less so." He didn't explain why. Nadia didn't ask. She just nodded and took her cup in both hands. They walked for another 3 hours. They strolled through the city park, where the golden strauss stood in the November fog. They stopped by a small antique shop on Dorotheergasse, run by an elderly man named Victor, where you could find old Austrian maps, postcards from the 20s, and pre-revolutionary Russian books. Victor nodded to Nadia as a familiar face. She had been here occasionally in search of old editions for the publishing house. He exchanged a few words with her in German, glanced at Farid with curiosity, but said nothing. As they left, Farid said, "You have acquaintances all over this city." "I've been here for 8 years, Nadia said, "and I go to the same places. The city is small if you live slowly." "Do you live slowly?" "I work slowly," she corrected him. "Proofreading is very slow work. You look at one word for 20 minutes. You get used to slowness in general." And what do you see when you look at the word for 20 minutes? Nadia thought, "It's history," she said. "Where it came from, what was before it, how it's connected to other words around it. Words are not alone, they are always in context." Farid was silent. He was looking at her. "You're talking about words," he said. "But I think it's about people, too." Nadia looked at him, then nodded. "Yes," she agreed. "About people, too." They met every day that week. Nadia later couldn't explain why she agreed right away. It didn't seem like her. She was the kind of person who thinks before agreeing, who weighs things before going. But here, she said yes, almost without thinking. Maybe because there was no pressure in his question. Would you agree? Not you must, not I want, just a question, with the right to say no. Or maybe because the letter was handwritten. The first day, Maria Theresienplatz and the Café Central. The second, they walked to the Prater and strolled along the alley of old chestnut trees, which stood bare in November, yet still beautiful. Farid said he had never seen such trees, so tall and so perfectly aligned next to each other. Nadia explained, "This is imperial heritage. Everything here was designed to look right from any angle." He nodded. "I understand. It's the same in Doha, just on a different scale." The third day, a concert at the House of Music, a small hall, a chamber ensemble. Nadia had warned in advance that this was not the Staatsoper. It was chamber music, strict and without glamour. Farid said, "I didn't come for glamour." At the concert, he sat very quietly, not moving. Afterward, Nadia asked, "Did you enjoy it?" He paused. "I didn't think I would feel Brahms in any special way. But yes, especially—" She didn't ask why. She understood that it was somehow connected to Haya. She didn't ask because some things are better left unbroken by questions. They met every day that week. Not for long, 2, 3 hours. She showed him Vienna as she loved it, not the palaces and parades, but the little details. The Naschmarkt on Saturdays, where you could buy Greek olives and Hungarian paprika in one place. A small bookstore on Seilerstätte, where the owner knew each customer by name and recommended books like one prescribes medicine, precisely for a specific case. The Jesuit church on Dr. Ignaz Seipelplatz, whose ceiling was painted with illusory architecture, columns and arches that don't exist, painted so accurately that it made your head spin. In the church, they stood silently side by side for several minutes, looking up at the ceiling. "Is this a deception?" Farid asked. "It's an illusion," Nadia said. "That's an important difference. Deception hides the truth. Illusion creates beauty where there is none. The ceiling is flat, but looking at it is a joy." The artist didn't lie. He gave. Farid looked at the painted ceiling for a long time. Then he said, "Haya would have loved this place. She was always interested in how the appearance of something that doesn't exist is created. She said, illusion in architecture is honesty. Because you know it's an illusion, and still you believe." Nadia nodded. She was silent. "Do you think about her often?" she asked quietly, after a pause. "Every day," he said simply. "But in different ways. In the early years, as a loss. Now, as a person who was." who taught me a lot, who I would have liked to introduce to you. You would have found a common language." Nadia looked at him. It was honest, not as a compliment, but as a fact. "Why?" she asked. "She also looked at things slowly," he said, "and saw in them what others didn't notice." On the 6th day, on the last evening before his departure, they had dinner at a small restaurant in the 1st District, where they served Viennese classics, schnitzel, pumpkin soup, apple strudel, an unfashionable place, without pretensions, with wooden tables and waiters who remembered another era. During dinner, the conversation flowed slowly, with pauses. They both understood that tomorrow he would fly to Doha. "Nadia," he said at one point, "I want to say something directly, without beating around the bush." "Okay." "This week has been unexpectedly important for me. I came to say thank you. I thought, one dinner, a formal meeting, that's it. But it turned out differently. You are a person I want to talk to think, to be silent with. I haven't said this to anyone since Haya." Nadia looked at him. "I understand why you're saying this," she said cautiously, "and I appreciate it. But I'm not the kind of person who can be part of someone's life from a distance. I read slowly, walk slowly, make decisions slowly. Doha and Vienna are not a small distance apart." "I know," he said. "I'm not rushing. I just want to know, are you willing to try? Slowly, without pressure, with the right to say no at any moment." Nadia was silent for a long time. "Aren't you afraid?" she suddenly asked. "Afraid of what?" "Of doing it again, after Haya." He didn't answer right away. He picked up the knife, set down the fork, looked away, then back at her. "I am afraid," he said. "Very. But I've learned something over these 7 years. Fear is the right reaction. It means it's important. If I weren't afraid, I wouldn't be serious." Nadia looked at him. Then she lowered her gaze. She picked up her glass of water. "Okay," she said quietly. "Slowly, without pressure." He nodded. As they left the restaurant, fine snow was falling, the first of that November, rare and hesitant. Nadia looked up. A snowflake landed on her glasses, and she laughed, softly, a bit awkwardly, because a snowflake on glasses is always a little funny. Farid looked at her, with an expression that she later tried to describe to her friend Beata, but couldn't. Not infatuation, not admiration, but something quieter and deeper, as if he truly saw her, all of her, with a snowflake on her glasses, and with her slowness, and with that Polish-Austrian uncertainty. "Good night, Nadia," he said. "Safe travels," she replied. He left. She walked home, again on foot, again through Ringstrasse. The snow melted before it could settle. When he flew away, Nadia put the dark blue dress in the closet, set the kettle on, and called Beata. "So?" Beata said right away. "So what?" "How is he?" "Different than I expected." "In what way?" "He doesn't make an impression. He just is. Asks directly, listens genuinely, is silent without awkwardness. Is that all? Also, he kept a glove for 3 years. Pause. Nadia, Beata said, I think you're in trouble. I think not yet, Nadia said, but yes, maybe. Then began what Beata called the most unusual relationship I've ever heard of. They exchanged messages, every day, sometimes twice a day. Not long messages, short, specific ones. I read today about the architecture of Jesuit churches. Your truth, an illusion, is more honest than deception. Today I edited a translation about Doha. The author writes about your city worse than it deserves. What exactly did he miss? And so it went, for pages. Then, video calls on Sundays. They chose this time as neutral. She had Sunday morning with coffee, he had Sunday evening in Doha. The 3-hour difference was convenient. 2 months later, he flew to Vienna again. For 3 days, combining it with a business meeting. She found tickets to the Musikverein 3 weeks in advance. Initially, she wanted to get standing tickets, as she usually did for herself. Then she thought better of it and bought regular seats. She warned him in a message, not a box seat, regular seats in the hall. If you need glamour, don't come to me. He replied, not needed. At the Musikverein, they arrived on time, without rushing. Nadia saw that Farid was looking at the hall, at the golden decorations on the ceiling, at the huge organ, at the rows of chairs. He didn't say anything, just watched. This hall is recognized as the best in the world for acoustics, she said quietly. Not for beauty, although it is beautiful, but specifically for acoustics. Engineers and architects still don't fully understand why. Coincidence? Farid asked. Or genius loci, Nadia said. The spirit of the place. They played Mahler, the Ninth Symphony. This was not a random choice for Nadia. The Ninth is Mahler's last completed work, written in anticipation of death, which he felt. Music that says goodbye. Farid listened very quietly. She occasionally glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. He didn't move, didn't flip through the program, didn't look around like many others. He was there, inside. Afterward, when they stepped out into the cold December air, he was silent for a few minutes. Nadia didn't fill the silence. Haya loved Mahler, he finally said. I never understood why. I thought it was too heavy, too slow. Nadia didn't respond. Now I understand, he said. This slowness, it's not an effort, it's a tension. They walked silently through the night in Vienna, past the opera house, along Ringstrasse, under the streetlights. Do you remember what you told me at our first dinner? He asked. That you read slowly, walk slowly, make decisions slowly? I remember, Nadia said. I thought then, here's a person who knows how to be inside time, not outside of it. I've spent my whole life outside. Nadia looked at him. Now? Now, I'm learning, he said simply. After the concert, they ate at a small restaurant in the First District. He brought Qatari sweets with him, the very lukaimat, small fried balls with date syrup. Haya adored them, he said. I wanted you to try them. Nadia ate and remained silent. They stayed in the restaurant until late. 2 months later, he flew to Vienna again, for 3 days, combining it with a business meeting. They went to a concert at the Musikverein. She found tickets 3 weeks in advance and warned him, "These aren't the ones tourists buy at the entrance. These are regular seats." At the concert, he sat next to her and listened to Mahler as if he were hearing something important for the first time. Not just music. After the concert, they walked through the night in Vienna, for a long time, almost an hour, and talked about Mahler, then about death in art, then about why some cultures can speak openly about death while others hide it. This was the first conversation in which Farid spoke of Haya not as a memory, but as a part of himself, alive. She knew how to talk about death without fear, he said. I think that's why, when she died, I was so confused. She was somehow ready for it. Not resigned, but understanding. And I wasn't. No one is ready, Nadia said. Even if you understand it intellectually. The body isn't ready. Have you lost someone? My grandmother. My father, 7 years ago. It's different, of course. No, he said. Loss is loss. The scale is different. But the emptiness, it's the same in shape. Nadia walked beside him and thought, here is a person who knows how to speak precisely, not beautifully, precisely. In Vienna, he stayed for 3 days. On the last evening, he brought her a box of Qatari sweets, lukaimat, small fried balls with date syrup that he had asked to bring specifically. You won't find them here, he said. Haya adored them. I wanted you to try them. Nadia ate and remained silent. They sat at her home at a small table. She let him into her apartment for the first time, and outside the snow was falling, real December snow, with a firm intention to settle. Your apartment is you, Farid said, looking around. What do you mean? Books everywhere. One flower on the windowsill, a chair by the window. Very little decor, but everything is exactly in its place. Here lives a person who doesn't need much, just the right things. Nadia looked at him. No one had ever described her apartment like that. Is that a compliment? She asked. It's an observation, he said. Although, yes, it's a compliment too. Then, a third visit, a fourth. In spring, she went to Doha for the first time. Doha greeted her with heat and wind from the bay. Farid met her at the airport, without a driver, just like back then at their first dinner. She understood that this was his principle, important meetings by himself. They spent 5 days there. He showed her Doha just as she had shown him Vienna. Not the tourist spots, but his own. The old Al-Bastakia district, where houses with wind towers have been preserved. The Souk Waqif market in the evening, when it gets dark and the lanterns light up. The Museum of Islamic Art, where Nadia spent 3 hours straight and wanted to dedicate an entire day. The languages work differently here, she said in the museum, standing by the display case with a Quranic manuscript. Arabic calligraphy is not just writing, it's a visual prayer. Are you a religious person? Farid asked. No, she said simply. But I respect systems that can create beauty from faith. It's a rarity. Why is it a rarity? Because faith often creates rules, not beauty. Beauty transcends rules. When both rules and beauty come together, that's something special. Farid looked at her. You're talking about Arabic calligraphy, he said. But I think you're talking about us, too. Maybe, Nadia said. She met his mother on the second day in Doha. Mariam al-Qasim was a small, energetic woman in her 70s, with a straight posture, intelligent, quick eyes, and that special way of greeting guests that seems warm but carries a careful assessment behind it. She welcomed them at home, in a large family house with high ceilings and an inner courtyard where palm trees grew, and it was always quiet. The lunch was prepared by Mariam herself. Several dishes of Qatari cuisine, saffron rice with lamb, lukaimat, tea with cardamom. Nadia ate attentively and didn't pretend not to notice the assessing gaze of the hostess. That would have been disrespectful. They spoke in English. Mariam spoke well, but with pauses as she thought about which word was more precise. They talked about Austria, work, and Farid's childhood. His mother shared a story about how little Farid, at 7, took apart his grandfather's watch to understand how it worked and put it back together correctly, but a bit faster. Since then, grandfather was afraid to give him anything to hold. Farid laughed. Nadia did too. At the end of the meal, Mariam took Nadia by the hands, looked at her. Nadia didn't pull her hands away. Mariam said in Arabic, a short phrase. Farid didn't translate. "What did she say?" Nadia asked in the car. "She said you have a good gaze. That you look at people, not their status." "Is that good?" "In our family, that's the best thing you can say about a person." Nadia looked out the window at Doha. She thought that her grandfather Tadeusz would say something similar, just in different words. She met his mother, a small, energetic woman who looked at Nadia attentively, without aggression, but also without immediate acceptance. The lunch was polite, the conversation in English. Farid's mother was a bit embarrassed by the language, but tried her best. At the end, she said something to Nadia in Arabic, a short phrase that Farid didn't translate. "What did she say?" Nadia asked in the car. "She said you have a good gaze," Farid replied. "Is that good?" "In our family, that's the best thing you can say about a person." Nadia looked out the window at Doha rushing by. New towers, the desert behind them, the bay in the distance. "Farid," she said, "I want to ask something." "Yes?" "Have you thought about how this will all work practically? You're in Doha, I'm in Vienna. This isn't a temporary situation." He paused. "I have thought about it," he said. "I don't have a simple answer. There's a foundation office in Europe. It's in Zurich now, but it could be in Vienna. I can work from anywhere. You can too, partially. It's not impossible." "It's not impossible," Nadia repeated thoughtfully. "But it's a big change for both of us." "Yes." "And are you ready?" "I don't know if I'm ready," he said honestly. "But I know what I want. That seems more important." Nadia was silent. "Give me some time," she finally said. "Not much, but I need to get used to the idea that life is changing." "How much?" "I don't know. A few weeks? Maybe a month?" "Okay," he said without pressure. She took a month. Not the whole month. After 3 weeks, she wrote to him, "I've been thinking. It's true, a big change. But you're right. What you want is more important than whether you're ready." "I want to try. For real. If you're still offering." He replied within 10 minutes. "I'm offering. Slowly. step by step. As you say about proofreading, looking at each word carefully. She laughed as she read it. The next year and a half was just like that, slow, attentive, step by step. They lived in 2 cities, but now it felt less like distance and more like a schedule. 3 to 4 meetings a year, each time for a week to a week and a half. Correspondence every day. Calls on Sundays. Farid moved the Foundation's European office to Vienna. It took several months and required negotiations with the Austrian side, but it was done. "It's not just because of you," he told Nadia. "Vienna is a good place for the Foundation. But, yes. You too." Nadia, in turn, began translating their educational materials for the Foundation. It made sense. She knew Arabic, understood how the Foundation worked, and grasped the context. This added another layer to their connection. They were now together in life and colleagues in a sense. They got married 2.5 years after that first dinner at the Palais Hansen Kempinski. In November, because Vienna in November, and because 3 years ago it was also November, and because they both loved this month more than others. The registration was modest, at the town hall, with 2 witnesses from each side. Beata cried, even though she promised not to. Farid's mother flew in from Doha. Now she looked at Nadia not with caution, but with the acceptance that comes slowly but firmly. After the registration, they went to Café Central, the place where Trotsky sat, where they had coffee for the first time. They sat at the same corner table. Nadia ordered coffee with cream, Farid, water with lemon. The waiter brought their orders and left. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Looking at the cafe hall, high arches, newspapers on the stands, people at neighboring tables. "Are you thinking about what will be?" Nadia asked. "No," Farid said. "I'm thinking about what is, right now." Nadia nodded. She picked up her cup with both hands. "Like in November 3 years ago," he said, "when I was sitting on the steps and someone brought me soup." "It wasn't a step," Nadia corrected him, "and it wasn't soup." "It was a glove and silence," he said, "and that's exactly what I couldn't forget." Nadia looked at him. Through the thick lenses of her glasses, through everything that had happened over the 3 years, the letter, the dinner, the snow on the glasses, Doha, the Jesuit ceiling, the manuscripts, the Lukaimat, the good look, the office in Vienna. "Do you still keep the glove?" she asked. "On the shelf in Doha," he said. "Now we have shelves in Vienna, too." "Then it will move," he said. They exchanged glances, and both smiled at the same time. Life after the wedding unfolded as it does for people who arrived at it slowly and seriously, without abrupt changes, because everything had already been thought out and chosen for real. Nadia continued to edit texts at the publishing house and occasionally translated. Her colleagues at Schreiber and Kalt reacted to the news of her marriage with restrained goodwill. The people at the publishing house were introverted. Information spread slowly, and a month later, someone still didn't know. The editor-in-chief, Günther, only said, "So now we have connections with the Qatari fund. That's good for Arab authors." Nadia laughed. Beata organized a small celebration for them at a Polish cafe on Naschmarkt, just the 3 of them, with bigos and real Polish vodka. Farid drank tea, but toasted seriously. Beata looked at him during dinner with the expression of someone who is still processing information, and later said to Nadia in the restroom, "I understand now. He's not a wealthy man. He's just the right man who happens to be wealthy. Nadia laughed. Exactly. Farid's mother, Miriam, accepted Nadia. Not immediately, not easily, but genuinely. It took almost a year, several meetings in Doha. One time she came to Vienna, then again. Eventually, something clicked in her after one conversation. They were talking about Adam, who wasn't born yet. And Miriam asked how Nadia envisions raising him between two cultures. Nadia answered calmly and specifically. Both languages from birth. Both cities as home. No choice between them. It's not competition, it's a resource. Miriam was silent for a long time. Then, "You speak like someone who has already lived this." "Lived it," Nadia said. The Al-Qasim Foundation opened an office in Vienna on Seilerstätte, in a small historic building that Farid renovated with particular attention to detail. Nadia did part of the translations for the foundation, sometimes consulting on communication with European partners. This added another shared layer to their life. When Adam turned 1, they went to Krakow together. Nadia wanted him to see his grandfather's city from the very beginning. The grandfather was no longer there. Christoph had passed away 3 years before Nadia's wedding, quietly in his sleep, with a book on his chest, as befits a historian. But his apartment in Kazimierz had passed to Nadia, and she kept it, renting it out to tourists in the summer while she visited 3 times a year. Now they had come together. Farid walked through Kazimierz, the old Jewish quarter of Krakow, and looked silently. Nadia could see that he understood something important. This was also a layer of history that remained alive in the stones and names of the streets, in the synagogues and cafes. "It feels like part of Doha here," he said. "Like Al-Musharreb." "What do you mean?" Nadia asked. "That it's a place that carries the people who are no longer here, and the townspeople choose to remember or to forget. Kazimierz remembers." Nadia looked at him. "That's why grandfather never left here," she said. "He said that to leave is to pretend it never happened." Adam was sleeping in the sling on Farid's chest and heard none of this. But Nadia thought, he will inherit this. Not the words, but the very feeling that a place is not just coordinates. Life flowed calmly, steadily, filled with warmth. The kind that isn't described in novels because it has no dramatic twists. Only a steady warmth that doesn't go away. Nadia sometimes recalled that December reception at the opera. She tried to find the moment when she took off her glove. Was there something special about it? Or was it just a reflex? She couldn't remember. She only knew that it couldn't have been any other way, and that it turned out to be everything. Life after the wedding unfolded, yes. Without sharp changes, everything had already been planned. Nadia didn't leave the publishing house or stop translating. She just started doing part of her work from Farid's apartment in Vienna, which he bought on Siegelgasse, small, in an old building with high ceilings and shelves where Nadia immediately placed her books. Farid worked between Doha and Vienna, a month there, 3 weeks here. When he was in Doha, they talked on Sundays and exchanged messages every day, just like the 2.5 years before the wedding. The distance didn't become shorter, but it became different. Now it was not the distance between 2 people, but the distance between 2 cities of one life. 2 years later, their son was born. They named him Adam, a name that sounds the same in Polish, Arabic, and German. Nadia insisted, and Farid agreed immediately. It's right. He doesn't need to choose the language of his name. Adam grew up between Vienna and Doha, spoke 3 languages from birth, and at 3 years old, he clearly stated that German was better because you could build long words out of small ones, like building blocks. Nadia laughed. He was her child. In Vienna, they still had the geranium on the windowsill, the same one, reddish, that had survived 3 moves and 3 winters. Now it had endured a few more years, a move to a new apartment, and Adam, who once tried to tear off a leaf and received a brief "no" from his mother in such a tone that he never tried again. And the white glove sat on a shelf in their Vienna apartment, in a small wooden box that Farid had made specifically, without a signature, without an explanation. Just a glove on a shelf. When Adam was 5, he asked, "Dad, what is this?" "This is the beginning," said Farid. "The beginning of what?" "Of everything," he said. Adam didn't quite understand, but he nodded seriously and went to play. Adam grew quickly, and with that confidence that children have when both halves of their world do not compete with each other. In Doha, he was Farid's son, and Grandma Miriam taught him to brew coffee with cardamom, just as she had once taught her son. In Vienna, he was the boy from the apartment on Siegelgasse, and the old neighbor Walter sometimes gave him a piece of apple strudel through the slightly open door. Nadia looked at her son and thought about the 2 halves, her own, Polish and Austrian, how they never completely coincided, but also didn't interfere with each other. Adam would be different. He had other halves, Arab and Central European, more complex, further, richer. Farid gradually began to understand the city of Vienna, first through Nadia, then on his own. He found a small pool in the first district where he swam in the mornings while Nadia was still asleep. He discovered a cafe on Schottgasse, where he would go with his laptop in the first half of the day. He found a bookstore on Mariahilferstrasse that had a good selection of Arabic literature in German translation. Vienna accepted him slowly, as it does with everyone who is not in a hurry. It doesn't like those who burst in with the intention to conquer, but with those who come attentively, it becomes their own. One autumn day, when Adam was already 3 years old and attending a small kindergarten in their neighborhood, Farid called Nadia in the middle of the workday. "Nadia, can you step out for an hour?" "I'm working." "I know. Will the text wait?" "What happened?" "Nothing. I just want to show you something." She exhaled, saved the file, put on her coat. He was waiting for her at the entrance to a small courtyard on Johannesgasse, which she sometimes visited just for the sake of it. There was an old ivy climbing the walls and a quiet fountain. The courtyard was empty, only 2 pigeons at the edge of the fountain. "Why are we here?" Nadia asked. "I passed by this morning," said Farid, "and I thought you should see this." "I've seen this courtyard 100 times." "Not today. Look over there." She looked into the corner where he was pointing. There, between the ivy and the old brick wall, was a niche, small, inconspicuous. And in the niche, someone's little fresco. Tiny, clearly handmade, but made with love. A small Vienna, the dome of Karlskirche, figures of people by the water, Nadia was watching. "I've never noticed it," she said quietly. "I hadn't noticed it either," said Farid, "until I slowed down." She looked at him. "Did you make this?" she asked. "No," he laughed. "I can't do that. But someone did." And that's important. Nadia looked at the little fresco. Someone's hand. Someone's love for the city, left in the wall, seen only by those who look slowly. "That's exactly it," she said quietly. "What?" "What you've done with me. I lived in this city for 8 years and didn't see this corner. You made me look differently." Farid was silent. "Likewise," he finally said. "Only you made me look at all, at anything. Before you, I was just going from point A to point B." Nadia looked at him, then at the fresco, then back at him. "We need to pick Adam up from kindergarten," she said. "Yes." "Let's go." She took his hand. They left the courtyard and stepped out onto the street, into November Vienna, which was dark and damp and smelled of chestnuts. Sometimes in life, there are two kinds of changes: those that happen like an explosion, and those that occur so slowly that you only notice them in hindsight. Nadia sometimes looked back. At that December night at the opera, at the cream-colored letter, at the snow on the glasses at the restaurant, at Doha and the Jesuit ceiling, at Adam in the sling by his grandfather's chestnuts in Krakow. And each time she thought, all of this is from one glove. One glove taken off in a second without thinking, because otherwise it was impossible. Years passed. Adam turned 8, then 12, then 17. At 17, he spoke German, Arabic, and English fluently, a little Polish, from Grandma Karin in Krakow, and from the remembered childhood words of Grandpa Tadeusz, and some French by choice. He was quiet, serious, with his father's posture and his mother's habit of looking slowly. He wanted to study architecture. Like Aunt Haya, he said, even though he had never known her, only from photographs and from how his father sometimes talked about her. Farid continued to work between Doha and Vienna. The foundation had grown into something big over the years, several hundred scholarships annually, its own teacher training program for technical disciplines, several partner universities. The name remained the same, only the word international was added at the end. Nadia eventually became the senior editor for the Arabic section at the publishing house. Thanks in part to her work, Schreiber and Kalt published several important translations from Arabic over the 15 years, which were recognized and received awards. Gunther gave a toast at the anniversary party. "Nadia Wojtek opened up a whole world for us. Literally, a world that went from right to left." Everyone laughed. Nadia poured herself some water. Beata opened her Polish restaurant. Not a small cafe, but a real one, with a menu of 5 dishes and good Polish wine. Nadia went there every Wednesday and always ordered the same thing: bigos and raspberry tea. Beata would sit next to her for half an hour when there were no customers, and they would talk about nothing. Just like people who have known each other for 20 years can. One evening, when Adam was already 18 and had gone to study in London, Imperial College, just like his father once did, it wasn't planned, it just happened. Nadia and Farid suddenly found themselves alone in their Vienna apartment. Truly alone, without a child, without guests. Strange, Nadia said. What exactly? The silence. I forgot it. Farid laughed. They sat at the same small table by the window where a red geranium stood, the fourth generation, grown from a cutting of the previous one, because that one had eventually died after a record 15 years, and Nadia couldn't just walk away from it. The geranium was the same, and yet not the same. Farid, Nadia said. Yes. Are you happy? He looked at her, thought, taking his time as always. Yes, he said. That's not the right word, but yes, I'm living correctly. That's rare. Why isn't it the right word? Because happy is about a state, and this is about movement. I'm going in the right direction. That's better than happy. Nadia looked at him. You've changed, she said. Changed how? Since that December evening when you sat alone on the steps in the rain. You changed that, he said. No, Nadia said. I just brought soup. You've changed. He was silent for a long time. Okay, he finally said. Both things are true. The red geranium stood on the windowsill. Vienna was outside. November, dark, with the smell of chestnuts. In a box on the shelf lay a white glove. This, about why some people do the right things, not because they have to, but because they simply cannot do otherwise, is discussed by Adam Grant, a professor of organizational psychology at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, author of the book Give and Take, which has transformed our understanding of who achieves success in life and why. Grant, based on extensive research, has shown that people he calls givers, those who help others without expecting immediate returns, build deeper connections, more trust, and, surprisingly, achieve more in a professional sense over the long term. Not because giving is a strategy, but because those who can see another person and do something for them just because, they usually see the world around them differently. Nadia didn't think about this when she took off the glove that December evening at the opera. She simply saw the situation and did what seemed obvious. But it is this, not calculation, not strategy, but simply the obviousness of helping, that remains in the memory of the person who was helped as something rare and genuine. Sometimes one quiet gesture without words is worth more than a long explanation. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments and give it a like. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss new stories. Until next time.